have a general methodological point. I think this is a chapter where it's very easy to go with the flow and say yeah, and repeat things that she says rather than challenging it. I think it's especially important to raise a lot of questions about things that are said, and they're not always questions of, not primarily questions, is that really true, which is a general thing you want to ask, but questions of concrete, of meaning and purpose. And the first question I would approach this with is one I don't have an answer to. Why is this chapter here? In other words, what would be missing if this chapter were omitted? I can think of some leads, but I'm not concerned to answer that question. But I think that's a question that you need to raise. What is she accomplishing in this chapter? But first, I want to nail down that, you see, I'm concerned here with an issue of methodology as a student. No, I don't mean as a student, as a professional intellectual. You need to wrestle with the text more than I see people doing. It will pay dividends.
I think part of the reason the chapter's here, I mean, not the whole reason, is to show how the theory of concepts applies to existence, consciousness, and identity, because it's not obvious how it does apply. I mean, that's what I think makes this, that makes this part of the sequence we've been following the book, which is extending the theory to different concepts. Apart from that, I don't know that it would need to be here in this book. So, I mean, she does other things in the chapter too, but I don't know that it would need to be in this book except for that. It's initial reaction.
Yes. So one thing that occurs to me is just if you're offering a new theory of concepts, you're going to want to show how it applies to a variety of different kind of concepts. And these are a kind of special case too. So that's one reason. Now, what makes me hesitant about that being the reason is that she doesn't have a chapter on mathematical concepts, which if she wanted to, here's how it works in major areas, it would seem that that's a major area she'd discuss. So maybe there's another reason, but that's one suggestion.
Yeah, just two thoughts on why it's here. One is the one that's already been mentioned. We're given a new theory of concepts. Part of what she's doing to validate it is shows how it applies to different classes of concepts. This is a class of concepts she regards as very important. So well handled or explained by other theories. So it's part of showing that the theory, it's just part of the induction supporting the theory to discuss them and the elaboration of the theory. But the other reason is the book is going to close with two other related reasons. The book is going to close with a chapter on consciousness and identity, right? The theme of the closing chapter is the relationship between consciousness and identity, and how important it is to get that right. And how epistemology is all about getting that right. It's been gotten wrong elsewhere, and the objectivity depends on understanding the relationship between that consciousness has an identity, and that its identity has to do with being an active thing that's identifying existence and so forth. So a lot of this content helps to set up that chapter. And then, well, why does it end with that chapter? And why does this book have that whole structure? Well, a major theme of the book, and the major theme of her philosophy, right, is objectivity. Objectivity as taking responsibility for the activity of your consciousness in identifying what exists. rather than treating it as something that happens automatically, or that the consciousness does what it does, but what it does, it's very active but unrelated to facts. And so if it's true that these concepts are safeguards of objectivity, are needed for objectivity, set the context for thinking about objectivity, and a theme of the book is objectivity, and the closing chapter is on objectivity, then a discussion of these concepts needs to be in this book, and needs to be in this book late enough that it's following the kind of general outlines of the theory that it's going to be a special application of, but early enough that it's before the chapters that speak more abstractly about the function of concepts as a unit of the function of consciousness generally, and of the general conclusions that we need to, the general way we need to understand the nature of consciousness. So that's why I think it's here after everything but the two chapters that kind of talk about concepts as what their role is in consciousness, and then talk about consciousness in general as a process.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to say connects to what Greg brought up. I think it's true that some of these kind of extended discussions are part of the induction of the theory. So if it's a theory about the nature of concepts as such, it's going to have to cover the whole ground. But I don't think the reason that you have concepts of consciousness and axiomatic concepts is just, well, you need some extended discussion of special cases. If you think of it as it's an introduction to the objectivist epistemology, I think what is radically new in the objectivist epistemology is it's a new perspective on consciousness. And if you said a little more, I mean, from ITOE, it's a new perspective on a conceptual consciousness, but she has a view about a perceptual consciousness as well, which is different. But she says, well, you have to keep in mind that I have this view, but it's not going to be discussed here. And from that perspective, to really flesh out the view of consciousness and a conceptual consciousness that's emerging, she has to talk about concepts of consciousness as this is knowable, intelligible. It's by the same process of conceptualization that you reach these concepts, but that it's, if you take some of her contrast, can you measure love? So if someone has a view that you can't deal at all scientifically with consciousness, and the concepts are sort of vague, made up, and the same with definitions. Definitions are, it's just what somebody says, it's by decree, and axioms are arbitrary. If you have that kind of view, you're not getting at all her view of what how a conceptual consciousness works, and that in all these cases, what it looks like to proceed objectively or rationally or scientifically is radically different. And I think that, so these are, I think someone said, like, why isn't there a discussion of mathematical concepts? These are key concepts in philosophy that have been so distorted, and that if you don't get these right, you don't get a right approach to epistemology. And I think that's what the latter chapters, as Greg was stressing, go on to do.
Yes, I'm very happy with what Greg and Onkar said. I would add one thing, or one thing with two parts. The first thing is that no one else ever talked about axiomatic concepts, and the fact that she has talked about implicit axiomatic concepts, permitting us to go form concepts, means that she needs to say something about it somewhere, because it's a new idea, and a lot of questions would come up naturally about it. But the other part of that is that they don't work exactly like the other concepts. There are no contours, there's no CCD with a range of measurements. So it's important to show that she recognizes that, and that the earlier material about distinguishing characteristics as a range and so forth are not involved here, and that the theory does not assert that they do, that it is involved here.